Patti Snyder. Finally,
Hi.
we get to talk in person.
I know, gosh, I mean, that WhatsApp has just been very sweet, but thank
Yeah,
gosh I can touch you.
yeah, and you shared so many stories about you and Jimi Hendrix and about your life. And I know we don't have that much time now, but it's so fun to get to actually talk in person and maybe
Yes.
just that. Yeah, I know you can't share all those stories, but maybe if you just like to share a little bit about your life and finding the Urantia book and how you and Jimi Hendrix were close and shared your spiritual book
Yeah.
and yeah.
Well, we had a very strange kind of relationship. I mean, I respected him a lot, and he respected me, but when I first met him, I think I was 15, 14 or 15. But in the summer, well, I was going to high school in North Carolina. And in the summertime, I would go to Englewood, New Jersey with my girlfriends and their mom, which turned out to be one of my cousins. But I used to call their mom Aunt Eleanor. Well, she was a real pistol. But my oldest friend, Brenda, there were two sisters, Brenda and Sylvia. Brenda was the older one, and she was dating Boo Frazier, who was Dizzy Gillespie's Frazier's. Dizzy was Boo's uncle.
Uh-huh.
So Boo knew everybody. I mean, anybody in music knew about Boo Frazier because he was a very popular guy. Well, Eleanor trusted him, so he could take us anywhere, and he took us everywhere. Oh, so we were in he took us to Small's Paradise, and we were there. I'm trying to think if it was Small's. It was either Smalls or the next. No, it must have been Smalls Paradise. Yeah, it was. I'm confusing it with Birdland because he took us there too. But so we were 14. He wouldn't buy us alcohol, but we could get Roy Rogers or Bloody Shame or whatever they called it. But it was in the afternoon, early evening, I guess, and King Curtis's band was playing. And Jimmy was playing with King Curtis. Well, we knew who King Curtis was, but nobody knew who Jimmy was. He was just the guitar player. So Brenda said to me, "Patty, that guy keeps looking at you." I said, "What guy?" "That guy over there." "Guy over there," I said, "Oh, come on, you're just saying stuff." Then she said, "No, he's looking at you." So when the music stopped, they had interact. And he went over, that guy went over and put a whole bunch of quarters in the juke machine. And he came and asked me to dance. And like there was nobody else dancing. So, I mean, what are you going to say? I thought he was so cool. So I said, okay. So I went and we danced the whole break. I mean, we just danced. And then afterwards, because, he was kind of shy and he didn't really talk a lot. And it was just, somebody like that holding you. And he was like, oh, it was like so special. I mean, think of it and you just get warm all over thinking about it, And then, but then after that, I didn't see him at all. I didn't see him for a long, long time. He went to the army. He went to England. He got all messed up, with God only knows what. But music was his passion. It always was his passion. And there was this movie that came out. I was roommates with Genevieve Wade, who was married to John Phillips, right? And there was a movie, I think it was Royal Flash or something like that. But we went to the movie, and then that turned out badly. But Jimmy was doing a concert in Harlem about the same time. So Jen was doing this movie Move with Paula Prentice and Keith Sutherland or something. So the studios, she was a big deal then. She was the toast of New York. She'd just done this movie with Calvin Klein about them running around London. And because he was black and she was white, and that was very shocking. Actually, they wouldn't let her back into South Africa because of that movie. She was from South Africa, right?
Wow.
But and she would never let me see the movie. She said, no, we lived it. But so she had a limo, so we went up to Harlem to see Jimmy. And he was like really a toast then. And he came off the stage, and I looked at him, And I remembered he was this guy from King Curtis. And he looked at me, and you connect with someone when you have something in common. And and he kind of smiled, and I was like, wow, that's him. And they were rushing him off and all of that. So, and then the next time I saw him I guess it was at Steve Paul's. We used to go there. It was this club where all the rockers went in West Side of New York. And he came up, we started talking, and it was, hey babe, what's your number and all of this. So we kind of got to know each other, and then we started talking. And I was staying with a friend, Arlene, in Murphy Hill. And Devin lived right across the street. I mean, Devin was this chick that Jimmy used to shoot up with. And she died shortly after him, right? But she lived right across the street. I mean, how ironic is that, So he'd come to see me, but I didn't do drugs. I smoked pot, but I didn't do anything else. I wasn't into pills, I wasn't anything. So we'd talk about stuff, He'd tell me about his angels, that he was, because I asked him how did he get into music. And he said he was lying in the fields one day. He was very young, and he was looking up at the clouds. And this angel came out of the cloud, and he was playing a guitar. The angel had a guitar. And he said it just blew him away, and he could never forget it, And then we talked about some other stuff and all, but I was attached to him in a really strange way. And Steve Paul's was the place over on the West Side. So he would come there, a lot of rockers, Janis Joplin, everybody hung out there, because Skip was the bouncer, and Skip was this phenomenal guy. He was a karate master back then, and nobody knew anything about karate, but he was he was a real master. He'd studied in Japan and all of that. But he would never put his hands on these guys. He had these big chains, and he'd beat people with chains if they tried to break through the door. So nobody messed with Skip, so everyone felt very safe there, And so I'd go there, and then I was a waitress there for a while. And after it closed, Jimmy and everybody would go down to Electric Ladyland. And he would play, just play and play and play. And you just kind of sit there and zone out and listen to him. And then after he got sick of playing, he'd come up and he'd mix the music. He'd start mixing. And he would always have his voice so far in the background. So I'd say, Jimmy, why don't you bring it, come on, we want to hear you, bring it up. And he'd say, no. And I said, well, what? He said, well, they won't listen. He said, but if it's in the background, people have to listen. And I listen to some music when I go to sleep. I always make it really soft, so I can listen. I never forgot that. But he was really into blackbirds and God only knows what else. And it was heartbreaking, because sometime I'd see him and he was really zoned out. Zoned out. And I wrote him a letter, and I said, look, you got to stop this, you really do, because you're going to wake up dead one day, and that's not going to be very nice. But, people do what they do. And he'd always be straight. When he'd come to see me, he'd never be zoned out like that. But he'd go across the street with Devin and get whacked, and then these other girls would come, because, Jimmy and his women. I've never been a jealous type. I'm just not. I knew he had to do what he had to do, go ahead. It's not my scene. All right, so you in bed with, how many chicks you see him in bed with? 100, okay. And, and the plaster casters, oh my God, how do you ever live that down? And he used to actually blush. When I told him, I said, hey, I went down to the museum, I saw you, oh goodness, but,
yeah.
He couldn't get over it, the whole drug thing had him. And he didn't talk about Michael Jeffries, but I knew that he was a real headache. And Jimmy had in the back of his mind that this guy was not square with him. He was stealing all of his money, like they did to so many of the rockers then.
We're sorry to interrupt you, but I know you, or I was going to say that you were also an actress and a model and a singer, right?
Yeah, well, I was auditioning for Broadway shows and that sort of thing, but I wasn't exactly a singer. I didn't go to nightclubs and sing or anything.
Yeah.
If they did, I wouldn't. But I did I did hair in Paris. You know, I was studying for the lead and to do it in Japan. And
You did hair in Paris.
Huh?
What did you do in Paris?
I did hair in Paris.
Yeah, wow.
That was my first show. So I
Yeah.
was understudying for the lead.
Yeah.
And there was a show in Japan. I was good friends with Bertrand Castelli, who was a producer, like Michael was a producer in the U.S. Bertrand, Michael, I can't think
Yeah,
of
and
his.
you said you were best friends with the girl from the Mamas and the Papas.
Yeah, Mama Cass. Right, oh gosh, she was another trip. She was a trip. She was in love with Pick. So Pick was when Sharon Tate got murdered, right? Those goons wrote on the wall, "Death to pigs," but it looked like death to Pick. And Pick had been staying there for the whole week before they came. And because Pick was my good friend, his father was the ambassador to Germany, right? He was Charles Pickensdorsen III. And he was born in New Orleans. His mom got pregnant in Germany. They made him go to New Orleans to be born because he had to inherit all of the money, right? And his grandfather insisted that he had to be born there. Well, Pick was about, I don't know, 18 or 19, and they said his grandfather was dying and he had to go home. Pick was a rocker from way back, long hair, you know, the clothes. Pick went to New Orleans to see his grandfather on his deathbed, and his grandfather got well. Because he couldn't live. He got up anyway. Pick came back to Europe. Mama Cass had the biggest crush on it. It was like Bugs Bunny and this opera singer that chases him around. That was Mama Cass and Pick. And he was, here she's coming, and he's split. It was, I mean, just out of there. But the Interpol was looking for him because it said death to pigs. And he was so zonked out. So they said they were going to call a truce, and all of the big dealers, drug dealers, hash dealers really, hash and grass, in Europe, and they were talking to them because Interpol knew who everybody was. So Pick had to kick the habit because he didn't want to, you know, zone out and get his dad in trouble. Not that he cared about getting his dad in trouble, but he didn't want to. So he left there and he was staying in an apartment in Greenwich Village on 14th Street, which belonged to another friend of ours. Well, I was at Genevieve's house on 86th Street because she had just married this bozo who was, you know, Matthew, and she just wanted to marry somebody. Oh, gosh. So I was up there trying to talk her out of it. And I had a little dog, a little poodle named Brandy. And the Woodstock was going on, but I'm claustrophobic. I can't do big crowds. I just can't. So I decided Brandy and I were going to walk down to 14th Street from 86th Street, right? Walk down to 14th Street to see about Pick because I was taking him food, or I'd slip him in a bottle of bourbon so he could kind of calm down like that. So Brandy and I left. I don't know, it wasn't too early in the morning, it was late morning. And we walked all the way down. Well, Jimmy called Genevieve and said, "Where's Patti?" And she said, "Well, Patti just left, she's going down there." "Oh, well, if she got it, yeah, she'll call me." So he said, "I wanted to go to Woodstock, can you find her?" Genevieve said, "She's walking, how can I find her, but she'll probably call me." And he said, Genevieve said, "Well, you know, she can't go because she's claustrophobic." Woodstock with 150,000 people, and I'm gonna go. Okay, but she said, you know, Jimmy said he would wait for me, and he told her that they had a helicopter, and I wouldn't have to deal with the crowds. He said, "So we'll just fly in, I'll do the show, and we'll fly out, and you'll be backstage, so you don't have to worry about it." He said this to Genevieve, but they couldn't find me. And he held a helicopter. He waited and waited until the last minute.
Wow.
And they were giving him a ton of crap. "You have to go, you have to go." So he left, he went. And
But you were with him in spirit.
yeah, I was in spirit. Oh, let me tell you, I was in Tunisia the night that he died. I was down at Sidi Bou Said. It's a big rock club that people from Tunis used to go down and hang out. And it was crowded, blue lights, loud noise, and everybody's dancing. And I was a kind of rocker dancer that if I started at 10, I'd dance till 4 in the morning, straight. just stay on the dance floor and keep getting down. I love dancing. So we were dancing. I was with a bunch of friends. And the next day I came back, I was staying with Dr. I have just lost his name, but he was a big doctor in Tunis. And he was a really dynamite man. And I knew them because of Mijinu and Patrick Beauchot, but I was at his house. And I came in that morning and everybody was tiptoeing and quiet. And I slept till about 10 or 11. And I got up and they said, "We have your breakfast. It's on the terrace." The terrace was the roof of the house and was overlooking the Mediterranean. And there were people water skiing. I mean, the morning is like etched in my head. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And they had washed all my underwear, which was the thing, and made me breakfast with my sheet and all there. And everybody's tipping around, and they were always sweet, but this was like, whoa, what's going on? And Patrick called me from Paris, and he said, "You heard the news?" I said, "What news? I haven't heard any news. What news?" And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Well, yeah, what's going on?" And he said, "Jimmy died," and I passed out. I passed out cold. I mean, what? And Patrick called back but he called back and he said, "Why don't you come back to Paris?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I should." So I went back to Paris, and they were all very nice to me. And then they told me, because before I left, they tried to get me not to go. They said, "Jimmy's in London. Why don't you wait for Jimmy?" And I really didn't think that much of London. I'd gone there for a birthday party. And we partied all night, so I just came back the next morning. "Why don't you wait for Jimmy, Patti?" I said, "Well, if Jimmy wants to see me, he'll come to Paris." Well, Jimmy had just been in California with John Phillips and Genevieve. Genevieve had married John Phillips by then. And they had a son, Tam. John was such a number. Oh, God, was he a number. But Genevieve was giving Jimmy a ton of crap because she's saying, "Well, Patricia really loves you, and you're really hanging out with all of these other women, and that's, your life is going to be stable with Patti, because she'll look after you." Oh. So he wanted to see me, that's what Genevieve said. But I wouldn't stay in London that night, and I just knew, later on, I figured, God, if I had only stayed, because I wasn't a druggie, and the chick he was with was out of it. Oh, if somebody had just hit him on the back.
I was watching a video with Stevie Ray Vaughan, who was a huge fan of Jimi Hendrix, and he said that he believed that he had been killed, maybe. And then I thought, well, that can't be true. But then I did some research, and it turns out that there are a lot of question marks around his death. That just a lot of unanswered questions, I guess, or inconsistencies.
Yeah, well, I think Michael Jeffries had it in for him, in a sense. I mean, I can't accuse anyone, I don't know, but amazing, Jimmy had no money afterwards. There was nothing left for his estate or any of that. And Michael Jeffries was not in trouble or whatever anymore. Who knows? But if she had just hit him on the back, because he gagged on his own tongue,
that's what they said.
So I felt, oh God, it took me so long to get over that. It took me so long.
Wow.
And I'd go to the show crying, and you can't cry in a show, you couldn't.
When you're acting?
Yeah, I was doing hair. Hair was still running and all of that.
Oh my God.
But I went to the record, this is like a year later, and I was going through, I used to this record shop in Paris, and they knew me there, and I knew, I'd go there looking for records, so I walk in, "Hey, Patti, there's something we want you to hear." So I go over, and they put these earphones on me, blasting, we all like loud music. And it was Jimmy playing the Star Spangled Banner as the sun was rising. I couldn't stop crying. I mean, tears were just running down my face. And if you listen to it, and because he taught me to really listen to his music, you could hear everything that was going on in America is in that song. I mean, the police, the riots, the people dying, the machine guns. It was just, it was just too much. And I was standing there frozen. I didn't move the whole time, holding my ears with these. It's just one of those things in life that you don't like to talk about too often because it's just,
Wow.
I don't know, it was heavy. And I cried about him for 4 years. I cried for 4 years. And my girlfriend used to go and see this spiritualist. She wasn't a psychic, but she was a spiritualist lady. And she had this little chapel with church benches and all. And you go in the door and she'd give you a piece of paper and you write down your question or whatever on the paper and you fold it. And you put it in the thing with a little donation, $1, $2. And then when she started, she'd give a little talk about morality and what people were doing. But she would open the papers, she'd feel them, and she'd talk to people. Then she would open and read the question and answer. Well, when she came to mine, she took a long, long breath, and she felt it, and she rubbed it, and she looked at me with this look of pity on her face, and she said, crying for a dead man, honey, is not going to take you anywhere. She said, you've got to let him go. I mean, she didn't know anything about me, you know, but I mean, when you get a message that strong, it's like a wake-up call. And it had been 4 years, honest. I didn't go out, I didn't go dancing. Well, I go dancing sometimes like a maniac, because you got to get the engine. And I had these girlfriends that were just as crazy about dancing as me. So we go down to these dance clubs. It was all men, right? And 3 girls. Me, Bridget, and my friend Catherine, Hildegard. And we just dance and dance and dance and dance and dance. You know?
And you said that there was kind of a mysterious circumstance around someone giving you the Urantia book that maybe was, do you think Jimmy had somebody give it to you because he was reading it?
That was the other thing. He was always en route to go to Devon's house, never, so he never brought it with him. But we would talk about spiritual things, and he kind of told me there was a book, you know, that I should read, that book that I had to see. And I go, oh, okay, I mean, a book. And I said, well, let's throw the I Ching. I was really into the I Ching. And he said, the I Ching? Yeah. I said, is it like this? He said, no, it's not like this. But we threw the I Ching. And he was worried about Mitch, you know, and his drumming thing. And Mitch was being, I don't know, obtuse or something like that. And the I Ching told him, well, he who comes too late will be left out. And that's when he got Billy Higgins as his drummer instead of Mitch. You know, I mean, it sort of had to do with that. So we talked about spiritual things, and, you know, I knew he was into something special. You know, I mean, it was just, but we never really got a chance to talk about it because he'd be too zonked out, then he'd be gone, and I didn't see him, and I'd see him, you know, and then, but I wrote him a long letter, and I said, look, I can't watch this, because he was getting bad, worse and worse with the Yellow Jackets and the whole bit. I said, I really can't watch this. And that's why I didn't wait for him in London. And I went home, and my father was dying of cancer. I wrote Jimmy this long letter and all. And I had written a song, and he was going to do it about him. It would, hello, babe, I know you're not plastic. You know I love you, I think you're fantastic, or something. But it was a catchy tune, you know, and I wrote it, I did it on tape and everything, and he loved it. He was like, wow, he was going to do it. Wow. But he never got to do it, I don't think. I mean, I don't know.
But do you want to tell the story of how you came across the Urantia? I got the impression that maybe it was a friend of his who gave it to you, or how do you think that?
Well, it was this guy, Steve, oh God, I was living on 23rd. This is really quite a little time after Jimmy died. I was living on 23rd Street, and I was going to the Virgin Islands with a bunch of friends for the weekend. And I had a bank deposit. I had to make it that Monday. And there were no ATMs. I mean, if you didn't make it, you just didn't make it. So I said, look, everything depends on this. So I gave it to this guy, Steve. And when I came back, I was a week late, but still, when I came back, everything had crashed. So I had another friend who lived down the hall. The guy, he lived just down the hall from me. So I said, have you seen Steve? You know, oh, he took my money. And she said, what do you mean he took your money? I said, well, I told him to make a bank deposit. And she just died laughing. I said, why are you laughing? She said, Steve's a junkie. You give your money to a junkie, you know, even a rich junkie. And his father was well off, but his father paid all his bills. But so I didn't see him until about Easter time. And Easter was a bad time for me because my mother died at Easter. So I would start crying 2 weeks before Easter and cry until 2 weeks after. So I'm getting ready for my crying season.
Oh,
I mean, I was a big depressive thing. And a knock on the door. And there was Steve standing there. And he said, have you ever heard of the Urantia Book? I said, the what? He shoved this blue book in my hand. And then he left. So, I mean, Steve, a junkie who really didn't care about this book. And my only connection with junk at that time was through Steve. Well, Mama Cass, who was running all over the place. But, I mean, it gave me chills. And I didn't know what to say or what to do. And I turned around, I had my family's oak table always in the dining area, which was right next to the kitchen, which was right by the front door in this apartment. And I always kept it empty. So I turned around and I put the book on the table. Steve was gone. And it was something so odd about just this beautiful oak table with this blue book sitting on it. And I stood and stared at it for quite a while. And then I opened it and I looked at the table of contents. And I went to the life of Jesus because I never believed the Virgin Mary stuff. I always thought that was a bunch of crap. Because if there was anything wrong with sex, why would our Father have us do sex, you know? I just didn't believe it. And then I found out that he was born on my birthday. Jesus was born on my birthday. And that his mother wasn't a virgin. I was sold on this book right then and there, you know. Hey, we got truth here somehow, you know. And so I started reading it. And that night I dreamed about my mother. And she said, Patricia, you must stop crying for me. Just stop it. You're holding me back. Just stop it. And I woke up going, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. But as I was sitting there looking at this book, after I opened it, I remembered a dream that I had had 10 years before. This was in 1974 when I was looking at it. When I was looking at the book.
Yeah.
And I had the dream in 1964. And I knew that in my mind. And in the dream, I was in my grandmother's house. She only lived there in the 50s, in the early 50s. And I was in her house, but I was operating this mimeograph machine, turning the wheels, and her house was in Chicago. Huh? You know, we lived in North Carolina, not in Chicago. And I was turning off these papers and jumping and dancing, so happy that the papers were finally being printed. And that really sort of wiped me out. And I sat up all night reading the life of Jesus and other things which just blew me away. I couldn't. But the life of Jesus I could relate to. And then I had the dream about my mother, and then I woke up and I've never felt guilt again.
Wow.
I've never cried because I felt guilty or felt bad. No, you know.
Wow.
And I read the Urantia Book for, 10 years on my own.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you came to learn that was also the book that Jimi Hendrix studied?
Yes, when I found that out, I was really wigged out. And I understood more that special connection that we had. Because it was something that it was really special, it was different. I mean, I wasn't jealous of him, even when he'd go away, I'd miss him and all of that, but you know, it was like we were still connected, we were still together. And for 4 years, I don't know if I held him back like I held my mother back. But I think about him even now all the time, you know.
And you said that table had been passed down since many generations, and you said something about that table being in your family ever since, like, they were freed from slavery or something like that?
Say it again?
I think you told me that table was passed down in your family since...
The table from, 250 years. That table has been in our family. And I had it refinished once, while I was in Santa, because my kid grew up in it.
Wow.
I grew up at that table, my mother, my grandmother. but I sent it to have refinished because we had marked it up. And the guy said, it's 250 years old, so please take care of it. Yeah, right, yeah. So he had the table about a week, and he called me up, Dr. Snyder. What? Your table. He had just gotten a music stand to refinish, and the music stand was documented. They had papers on it, and it was over 250 years old. He says, your table is the same wood. It's exactly the same wood. I said, well, I told you it was 250 years. And then he explained to me that when they made oak tables that time, they would chop down oak trees and throw them in the river and leave them for 40 years. And if it didn't rot, then they would take it out and make a table out of it. Huh. So when my grandmother, well, she was sold in slavery. She was from Santo Domingo, but she was an African woman, I guess, who they had enslaved and they sold her brought her to the United States. In South Carolina on the slave market. And this man saw her, and his name was Nance, and he bought her for $1,500. And at that time, you could get a black person for $2. He paid $15. She was totally beautiful, and he was totally in love with her. And he bought her diamond earrings. And this table, the first thing she bought for herself was this oak table, which I suppose, was important to them being enslaved. And it's a thing that, it's a beautiful table. I mean, it was plain. It was just plain oak, but I bet you it was really beautiful to her.
Yeah, wow.
It's
amazing.
Yeah, it was. And then when they put the book on the table, and it's like everything just, it was an awesome moment. It was a really awesome moment. And then when, I thought about the book, and I thought about Jimmy, and wait a minute, like the connection that we had that we never really talked about, we never discussed, was very real in my heart.
Wow. And then over the years, you've hosted study groups and studied with many people.
Oh yeah, I had very rowdy study groups. I mean, they were rowdy because it was always a big party and lots of people, and we were drinking wine, because I had quite a wine collection when I started. They totaled it. Sometimes somebody would bring something or another, but there were such good people. Jim Wanless was in Roy Moynihan, Will Sherwood, who's not bad at all, but and then there was a prison